the world held its collective breath on election night 2024 as the results of the U.S. presidential race trickled in. Against all expectations, Donald Trump had managed to secure a narrow victory in the Electoral College, clinching a second term in the White House despite losing the popular vote by a margin of over 3 million ballots. As the news spread, global markets plunged and world leaders scrambled to assess the implications of Trump's surprise comeback. Many had assumed his divisive first term would mark the end of his political career, but the former president had once again defied the odds, tapping into the resentments of his core base to mount a successful comeback campaign. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss an update on global trends that shape our future. In the days following his inauguration, Trump wasted little time in making good on his promise to upend the established order. One of his first acts was to formally withdraw the United States from the landmark Paris Climate Agreement, a move that sent shockwaves through the international community and threatened to undermine decades of painstaking efforts to address the looming threat of global warming. This decision was just the opening salvo in what would become a barrage of unilateral actions that disrupted long-standing alliances and economic partnerships. Trump's America First worldview had returned with a vengeance, sparking fears of a new era of isolationism and geopolitical instability. Nowhere was this more apparent than in the response from leaders across Africa, a continent that had grown accustomed to relying on American aid and development assistance. Among them was the president of Burkina Faso, Traore, who saw Trump's policy shift as a pivotal moment for his country and the broader region to chart a new course towards self-reliance and economic sovereignty. This move was widely condemned by U.S. allies and environmental groups, who accused Trump of abdicating American leadership on the critical issue of sustainability. Compounding this, Trump has also suspended U.S. foreign aid programs, a decision that is having devastating impacts across the developing world. The U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, is a critical provider of humanitarian relief, public health initiatives, and economic development support in some of the world's poorest nations. With the sudden loss of this funding, many fragile states are being plunged into even deeper crises. However, there is one African leader who has surprisingly applauded Trump's aid suspension: Marc Christian Kaboré, the president of Burkina Faso. Kaboré, known by his nickname Traore, has long been a vocal proponent of African self-reliance and reducing dependency on foreign assistance. He sees Trump's move as an opportunity for his country to accelerate its own agricultural transformation and achieve greater food security. Under Traore's leadership, Burkina Faso has been making remarkable strides in boosting domestic food production, particularly in the cultivation of staple crops like rice and wheat. This shift away from reliance on imported foods is a strategic priority for the president, who believes it will strengthen his country's economic sovereignty and resilience. To this end, Traore has made major investments in modernizing Burkina Faso's agricultural sector. In 2024, he personally oversaw the distribution of 20 state-of-the-art optical sorters to rice mills across the country, greatly improving the quality and competitiveness of locally grown rice. The impact of these interventions is already evident, with rice production increasing from 280,000 metric tons in 2022 to 326,000 metric tons in 2024. Similarly, wheat cultivation has been ramped up significantly, with 100 hectares of a 450-hectare farm dedicated to wheat production. Local flour mills like Lalando Sahel have committed to purchasing all of the wheat harvested, further strengthening domestic value chains. Burkina Faso has seen remarkable progress in its agricultural sector in recent years, with significant gains that have had a ripple effect across the country's broader economy. In 2023, the agricultural sector contributed 16.33% to the nation's GDP, which grew from $18.8 billion to $22.1 billion over the same period. This growth has been driven by impressive increases in the production of key crops like tomatoes, millet, and sorghum. President Traore has been the driving force behind this agricultural renaissance, firmly believing that African nations must become less dependent on external donors and instead prioritize building their own domestic capabilities. In his view, the decision by former US President Trump to suspend aid to the continent serves as a wake-up call, forcing African countries to take greater responsibility for their own development. For too long, we have been relying on handouts from the West, Traore stated in a recent address. But true progress will only come when we harness the abundant resources and ingenuity of the African continent. The days of begging for scraps are over, it's time we feed ourselves. This bold and self-reliant vision stands in stark contrast to the reactions of many other African leaders, who have decried Trump's move as a blow to critical health, education, and infrastructure programs across the continent. Organizations like the African Union have warned that the USAID suspension could have devastating humanitarian consequences, potentially undermining decades of hard-won development progress. However, Traore remains undeterred in his conviction. He sees the current situation as a pivotal moment for Africa to assert its economic sovereignty and chart a course towards true self-sufficiency. By leveraging the continent's vast natural resources and the creativity of its people, Traore believes that African nations can break free from the cycle of dependency and forge a new path of sustainable, equitable growth. The success of Burkina Faso's agricultural sector serves as a tangible example of this vision in action. The country's ability to boost domestic food production and reduce reliance on imports has not only strengthened its economy but has also enhanced its resilience and food security. This, in turn, has the potential to have broader regional implications as other African nations seek to emulate Burkina Faso's model. As the debate around the continent's relationship with the global north continues, the world will be watching closely to see whether Traore's philosophy of self-reliance and economic sovereignty gains traction. The outcome of this pivotal moment will have far-reaching consequences for the future trajectory of Africa's development and its place on the world stage. In South Africa, for example, the freeze on funding for the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, PEPFAR, has already forced the closure of HIV/AIDS clinics and the cancellation of vital treatment programs. Experts predict that this disruption could lead to a resurgence of the epidemic, reversing hard-won gains in combating the disease. Similarly, the suspension of U.S. assistance for emergency response and disease surveillance efforts has raised alarm bells among public health officials. There are fears that this could undermine the continent's ability to quickly detect and contain future outbreaks of viruses like Ebola or Marburg. However, Traore and his supporters argue that this crisis presents an opportunity for self-reliance. They contend that over-reliance on foreign aid has created a culture of dependency and stifled domestic innovation in many African countries. By being forced to chart their own course, nations will be compelled to find homegrown solutions to their most pressing challenges. "Look at us in Burkina Faso," Traore said. "Just a few years ago, we were one of the top rice importers in the region. But now, we are well on our way to achieving rice self-sufficiency through our own hard work and ingenuity. This is the model we must replicate across the continent." The president points to the establishment of the country's first large-scale wheat production program as another example of this self-reliant approach. By investing in modern farming equipment and forging partnerships with local processors, Burkina Faso is reducing its dependence on imported grains and strengthening domestic food security. Traore's vision extends beyond just the agricultural sector. He has also prioritized building up Burkina Faso's manufacturing capabilities, particularly in areas like textiles and mining. The goal is to move the country up the value chain, transitioning from a raw material exporter to a producer of value-added products. For too long, Africa has been the supplier of cheap labor and resources for the rest of the world, Traore remarked. But we have the talent and the determination to become masters of our own economic destiny. All we need is the courage to chart our own path, free from the constraints of foreign interference. This philosophy has resonated with many young Africans, who see Traore as a refreshing alternative to the continent's traditional political elite. Social media hashtags like #AfricanRenaissance and #MadeInAfrica have sprung up, celebrating the president's vision for a self-reliant Africa. However, Traore's approach is not without its critics. Some argue that his rhetoric of African self-sufficiency is little more than empty populism, ignoring the complex realities of global interdependence. They point out that Burkina Faso still relies heavily on imports for machinery, technology, and even basic consumer goods, a dependence that will be difficult to overcome in the short term. The new president of Burkina Faso, Traore, has taken a bold and assertive stance on the country's role in the global arena. His brand of muscular nationalism has raised concerns about the potential impact on Burkina Faso's diplomatic relations with its long-standing development partners. There are fears that this shift could lead to the country's isolation and deprive it of the valuable technical and financial assistance it has come to rely on. Traore's unapologetic support for former U.S. President Trump's America First policies has particularly unnerved some Western leaders. They view this alignment with suspicion, as it seems to signal a departure from the traditional cooperative relationships that have characterized Burkina Faso's engagement with the global North. Nevertheless, Traore remains undeterred in his convictions. He believes that the disruption caused by the suspension of aid from the United States represents a critical turning point for the African continent. In his view, it is time for a fundamental rethinking of the relationship between Africa and the developed world, moving away from a donor-recipient dynamic toward one of equal partnership and mutual benefit. The days of Africa being a passive recipient of charity are over, Traore declared. We have the resources, the talent, and the determination to chart our own course. All we need is the courage to take the first step. Traore's vision of self-reliance and economic sovereignty for Burkina Faso and the broader African continent has garnered both praise and criticism. Supporters see it as a bold and necessary move to assert the continent's agency and break free from the shackles of dependence. Critics, however, argue that the region's reliance on foreign assistance is too deeply entrenched to overcome easily, and that Traore's approach could further isolate Burkina Faso and limit its access to crucial international resources. As the world watches the unfolding events in Burkina Faso and across Africa, the question remains, will Traore's vision gain traction, or will the continent's long-standing dependence on foreign aid prove too difficult to overcome? The answers to these questions will have far-reaching implications, as they will shape the future trajectory of the African continent for generations to come. This is a complex and nuanced issue, and reasonable people may disagree on the best path forward. It will be important to carefully monitor and analyze the evolving situation in Burkina Faso and across the region to better understand the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead. Ultimately, the future of Africa's development and its role in the global community will be determined by the choices and actions taken by its leaders and its people in the years to come. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like as well as a sub so more people can see this.